It's two conscious guys talking, where conscious male leaders come together and have a discussion that is deep, that is nourishing, that allows us to see the illumination of consciousness that's unfolding progressively for men that are waking up in the world, and where you can get insights on your own awakening as a man, and also for amazing women that want to learn more about men's challenges and struggles that have created some of the dysfunction we've seen within men in its society, often called, quote unquote, the patriarchy and other terms. What created it? What is the genesis of it all? What can we do about it today to empower men to be all that they're meant to be and to support the awakening of consciousness for men and women and all? Yeah, so Tomás, again, thanks for being here today with me. And yeah, it's just this whole thing has arisen to help guys to be able to know how to navigate this time where there is a lot of focus, rightly, for I'll just say the feminine, or I don't know what words to give it. Sometimes I have had people argue with me what terms I should use there too. So, but whatever it is, but like for the feminine, we'll just call it for today. And in my perception, there's a lot of seeming negativity towards the masculine and the airwaves these days. Now there's other voices, but there's a lot of like, don't be so masculine, kind of, directly or indirect messages. And I think it's a pretty interesting. So I know for myself, because we're here to just have this chat, it's like for me, I know along the way over the years, as that message is stacked up, like I know I started to pull back on what I felt was like maybe a little too much that masculine energy and all that. And because sometimes I can bring it strongly, right? Really strongly, and be really, really very tough or strong or whatever, not to say the feminine isn't, but I'm just saying like that masculine sort of energy. Yeah. And it's been pretty interesting for me. So that's why I'm led to talk to you, Tomás, is I know like I'm not the only one dealing with this stuff. So kind of wondering what your journey has been. I could get into my whole story, but we're got limited time today, but I'm kind of curious what your journey has been like dealing, like growing up, like what that was like for you, like what challenges maybe you had between the sense of the feminine and masculine, because I know conscious male leaders seem to have had this dance, the guys I have talked to. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of wondering what that dance has been like for you, and when you ran into challenges around being a maybe a more conscious or sensitive guy, like how have you navigated those throughout your life? Like anything you could share with us today about that?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is a subject that has come up a lot for me in the last few months, so it's very current. I've had a number of people approach me to have just this conversation. So, again, thank you so much for reaching out. I'll just go back to my youth. As I was growing up, I had a very interesting example of what masculinity is and is not. My father is a Marine. He's 84 years old, but of course there's no ex-Marine. He's very much a Marine. And I was never, as a kid, interested in war. I was never interested in playing soldier. I was interested in spirituality, which made me really, really different in my house. And I was interested, yes, I became interested in sports and football, baseball, basketball, all of that, and I still am. But I was not interested in the military or combat or warfare, anything like that. I was instead interested in going within and the internal spiritual world. So in particular, I'm highly intuitive. Really, it's difficult to compare who's more intuitive than whom, but I would put myself as just as intuitive as pretty much any woman I've ever met. So it's not just a purely female trait. It's not. It's not. However, as a young man growing up in the time that we're growing up in, and we're both here in the United States in this particular society, there aren't that many expressions for young men. There aren't that many examples of men that we're calling conscious male leaders that are willing to take these young guys in and play a mentor style role for them, saying, okay, this is perfectly normal here. Here's how you navigate that, right? That is lacking for a lot of us guys, which leads to grown men being utterly confused about what masculinity is. And it makes perfect sense given the situation that most people find themselves in. And, the first thing that I did to really navigate was take the time for myself. Even as a kid, I found myself in nature quite a lot of the time alone, which didn't bother me in the slightest. A lot of hikes. I spent a lot of time in the mountains. I spent a lot of time fishing growing up. I grew up in New Mexico, and I was very fortunate. My grandparents had a couple of properties in the mountains with cabins that I had access to and could just go and go wander off into the woods and lose myself in a good, constructive way. So I think that really helped me a lot. It helped me deal with this sense of disaffection that sort of goes along with being, well, different. No matter what different looks like for somebody, different and not the same, not fitting the societal mold, not fitting the family mold, especially. That one was the one where I most needed to deal. I did. I needed to deal with it.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, that your dad was a Marine, and that would be a really interesting dynamic, that you weren't into any of those things that he apparently had been into, right? So that is really fascinating to me, that your constitution was as such, like right away, like, no, that just doesn't resonate for me, so to speak, right? So that just right away, I think that's amazing, that aspect. And then where I really felt like kindred spirit with you is that I was similar as a boy, growing up. It's everybody, kids talk about cars and all this different stuff, or like different, women in different ways, and all that sort of stuff. And I talk, right, and I was into, like you, I was into sports. Sure, I could talk sports a lot and play sports, all that stuff. But when it came to all the other stuff, I just always felt like I just don't really care about that stuff so much. So I totally resonate with with that, in terms of like my own experience. And then the fact that, like, you said, like, hey, men could be highly intuitive. That is an interesting thing in our society, that stereotype is put on, like, oh, the women are the ones with the intuition, the guys, not so much. And, that idea, and it's so untrue. I mean, there's so many guys that have phenomenal intuition, as strong as anybody, right? So it isn't a faculty of just women at all. I mean, so I love that you shared that as well. And I do have a question, as far as like, because I'm wondering how did that play out, that you were different? Like, for me, being different in that way had me at different times questioning, well, what's my problem? All these guys are into all this stuff and I'm not, like it came up for me anyway. And it also had me, I didn't date, I didn't really date or anything early in my life. So it's like, they're all, chasing all the women, and at least they're talking about like sleeping with all these different women, right? And then most of it's all lies and all that kind of stuff. So exaggerations, at least, right? So and then I'm like, my sister got pregnant at a pretty, fairly young. I mean,
Oh.
out of wedlock and everything. I mean, by
Mhm.
today's standards anyway, at like 20 or something like that. So, um, when that happened, and then that person didn't want anything to do with the child, I was like, oh, I never will be that person. So I'm totally going to be safe with these girls and totally conscious and all this stuff. So I made these big decisions, but I got a lot of flack for it. Oh,
Right.
maybe you're gay, you don't seem to be that interested and all that sort of stuff. So I was just curious, like, as I share some of these things, what you experienced. Do you experience some of these similar sorts of things, or other things, like kind of challenges you ran into, and how, because I know like all these things have an effect on us for our life.
Yeah, well, I didn't have any of the issues with dating. I did not date as much as a lot of guys my age when I was, in my late teens, early 20s. But I didn't have what I would consider to be any issues
Mhm.
getting interest from women, or a date, or a fling, or whatever it was. But I didn't seem to have that issue. Where I really had the most, I would say, the greatest amount of issues were in my own head.
Mhm.
Honestly, that's where I think I did myself the most damage when I was a younger man, because I didn't have an outward place to put all of this energy, to put all of this drive, spirituality, awakening. All of these things are all I've ever cared about. All. I mean, yes, I'm interested in other things, but when it comes right down to it, this is the path that's why I'm here. And this is all that really, truly, deeply matters. So as a young man, I didn't have a place to put that. I went to college like a lot of guys. In fact, I went to Tulane University in New Orleans, and uh, pretty much partied my ass off, and studied. Well, a lot of my friends flunked out because they didn't study. I did both. I went all in, and graduated with honors and all that, and had a wonderful time, and lived a lot.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's the best way to put that. I'll leave that one right there. I lived a lot, but as a young man in my 20s, there just wasn't a place for me to direct my energy in terms of career, in terms of what was expected of me. What was expected of me by my parents, by society at the time in the 90s, is when I graduated from college in 1993. The world was definitely changing. Spirituality, as we all know, really kind of came to the fore. People became interested in Buddhism and Eastern philosophy en masse in the 90s, and things like meditation, which I had been practicing for years prior, became more culturally accepted. But I was in my 20s, and I didn't have a clear path to be a spiritual coach or a teacher or the entrepreneur that I am now today. But now I'm 50. So I was missing some of this conscious male leadership, spiritual mentorship in my 20s. So, rather than turn it outward and become violent and indulge in addictive behavior, I kind of turned that frustration inward, and indulged in a lot of self-sabotage when I was younger. Yeah, this
Mhm.
sort of sense of, okay, what's wrong with me?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So it was more internal, like, because some of the, conversations I've had with guys, is like myself, like I didn't even think that this happened to me until like I started thinking about it. Like you have instances of being picked on or bullied because of the way you are. So I was kind of
Mhm.
curious, did you experience any of that? Because it's keeps showing up for guys I talk to. They're like, yeah, I used to get hard, bullied or picked on or whatever. Did you experience any of that?
Yes, I did when I was younger, not in my teens or 20s, because I played football in
Mhm.
high school, and I was a big guy. I'm 6'3", so that automatically rules out a lot of people coming up and chest bumping me or bumping me with the shoulder, trying to start a fight. That doesn't really happen. But I was bullied a fair amount when I was in elementary school, because I think that I mean, kids can be very cruel, of course, but I think that people just sensed that there was something different about me. So,
Yeah. And so yeah, I mean, because I have this theory that it's almost universal for guys of our kind in the Constitution. So I'm going to find out. I'm on this quest, so we'll
yeah.
see to see if that's true or not. But
Mhm.
that's very interesting. But and then I want to get back to the self-sabotage. Is
Sure.
so so
Yeah.
how so like for myself, self-sabotage I look like, okay, again, I won't ask any girls out, I'll just be so careful, that I just won't do it. You don't even have a girlfriend, then you won't be tempted to do anything, so-called wrong or inappropriate or right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
As possible. So for me, that was kind of my self-sabotage, and I had lots of negativity and the suicidal thoughts, all that stuff, as a teenager and then beyond into
Okay.
my adulthood. But so what did that look like for you, the self-sabotage?
It's more of a dialogue, and I even notice it now at 50. It's now I have the tools at my disposal to recognize it and course correct instantly. But in my 20s, I was lacking a lot of those tools. So what it looked like for me never bordered on suicidal thoughts, but it was just a dark sort of brooding. And it's it's a negative feedback loop, and it's circular. It looked like me thinking that I was either totally superior or a complete loser. One minute, why don't people get this stuff? It's so obvious. And then I would feel completely like an outcast, um, strange, consigned to the wilderness, right? Banished, ostracized, all of that in the same breath. And I would circulate between those until I managed to get myself in a better state of mind.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Yeah, that's so interesting. And that resonates for me too. I know all the way from when I was a teenager, I had friends that, had issues with the way I was being, though, would say, like, I remember one of my friends so clearly saying, "You just think you're better than everybody else." And, and he was right. Like he busted me. Like part of my woundedness and my ego or whatever was like, they're all stupid, all these people at this age, and it's just so ridiculous. And I totally know better than they do, and what's their problem and all that stuff. And then of course at the same time you're like, why am I not having the fun they are, though? What a loser I am. And like
Yeah.
feeling like there's
Yeah.
something wrong with me at the same time. And so
Mhm.
that totally resonates. And so how did that so you didn't have the tools and you got the tools later. Did that impact, like, your did it impact you in any ways with relationships, career? You mentioned it's hard to kind of find your way at first, like get your bearings. Like, what am I supposed to do as a guy? I'm told to do these type of different jobs, maybe
Yeah.
that are guy jobs or whatever. Like
Yeah.
what are the ways like that it impacted you?
Well, the career way is a huge way, in fact. And in my family, there's a bit of additional background. I grew up in a family that was fairly well off. We're not talking extraordinary, let's go purchase multiple yacht kind of wealth. Nothing like that. But I wasn't lacking for anything growing up. Emotional support, yes, that for sure, but financially, nothing at all. And the family, primarily my mom's side of the family, but also my dad, who is an MD and practiced medicine up until last year, and he's in his early 80s, mid 80s now. But my family valued certain career paths like doctor, lawyer, prominent politician. That was like a mantra that they just really beat into me, and they beat it into me more than other kids in my family, because I love school and academics and reading and languages, world travel, that sort of thing. And I did well in school and excelled quite a lot at a high level. So they drilled into me that I have to be one of these career paths. And, fast forward, age 23, I find myself confused. The default is enroll in law school, which was not where I was really ultimately supposed to be, but that is where I found myself. Yeah.
I see. So you went down that path. Did you actually go all the way through with law school and become a lawyer for a while, or?
I actually did. I did go through law school. It was, this is a fun component of this story. And I wonder if there are guys out there, or women even as well, that can relate to this. It was hell. It was the versus mentality, which characterizes the legal system. It's so-and-so versus so-and-so, combat, pitched battle, zealous representation, which means overzealous sometimes, right? That foundation of the system never sat right with me, but I did put myself through. I actually was using my own money to go through. So after I went through my first year and a half, I realized I've already spent tens of thousands of dollars, and this was the 90s, so it would be hundreds of thousands in today's costs. But I had already invested a significant amount. I may as well go forward and get my degree. But I'm never going to practice law. I'm going to refuse to sit for the bar exam, which is exactly what happened. I refused. I graduated, so I have a JD, but I refused to sit for the bar because I knew after about a year and a half that there was no way I wanted to practice law. That wasn't going to make me happy. That sat very poorly with my family. It sat very poorly with my ex-wife. That wasn't the sole reason for the undoing of that marriage, but it had a lot to do with it. It really did. And this was relatively early on when I made that decision. It turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life, yet I wasn't fully ready to break into the type of work and the type of being that I'm in today. So I went and practiced high stakes mediation and spent 13 years as a high level child custody mediator. So I didn't venture very far from the legal system because looking back, I wasn't ready. Pure and simple. I wasn't ready to.
Right.
So I chose a related career.
Wow. Okay. So from that place then, like that took a lot of courage, massive courage to do that, to face all that criticism and divorce and everything, and to move forward. So sometimes it happens one step at a time for all of us, right? Okay, I gotta move forward one step at least, and then some big steps there, and then you take the next step. So yeah. So what I'm hearing here is, like, for you had a stereotype because you're two things, because you're smart and because you're a man. It sounds like in part, like because you're a man, oh, doctor, lawyer, politician,
Yeah.
and you're smart, so of course then you need to do. Is that true or not true? Yeah.
It was very true. And the stereotype for women is completely different in my upbringing.
In Europe. Yeah. Okay, I was curious about that. So let's talk about, so where did you start learning tools that helped you get out of trying to kind of fit into this male stereotype, especially it sounds like with career as much as anything? Like helped break you through that? What was that for you?
Okay. Well, for me, it was spiritual practice. It was spiritual exploration because that's all I've ever been interested in. I always found that I was gravitating toward that. I always found that I was gravitating toward it. When I was younger, I would go to different churches and connect with different people, looking to find a home, something that resonated with me, which wound up being universal spirituality rather than just a set religion. But I studied Buddhism for a while in the 90s and into the 2000s extensively, and studied Eastern philosophy, grew up in a couple of fundamentalist Christian traditions. One, my parents left the church. The second, I left when I was 15 and got my driver's license. And I never went back to Sunday school again. So I'm one of those. And I was one of those kids that asked the really, really difficult metaphysical questions that the adults were utterly unable to answer to my satisfaction. So I was one of those kids. I was really fortunate to have a high school geometry teacher that introduced me to meditation. It's an unlikely place to start a lifelong meditation practice. But when I was a sophomore in high school, my geometry teacher was an old hippie, a real hippie from the 60s. And he would have us meditate. And every day in class, we would come in, we'd sit down, and we were sophomores in high school. So, both boys and girls, hyperactive. Some of the dudes that weren't into girls yet were throwing spitwads at each other. And, we're talking 15, 16 years old. So they weren't trying to be cool or anything. So there were some that were, some that weren't. But he would have us sit down and do some silent meditation, even for 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning of every class. And to my surprise, I found that I really, really resonated with it and enjoyed it and wanted to continue to do it. I recognized, okay, I can do this anywhere. This doesn't have to be in a formal practice setting. So it's kind of like church that goes with you everywhere you go. You don't have to just go to a temple or a Sunday school class or anything. And it's across the board, applies to any spiritual tradition. It's a practice, and I loved it, and I still do.
Mm-hmm. So through meditation, it was a huge part of you being able to follow your own truth rather than a stereotype of who you should be. That's what I mean.
Yeah. And it also helped me even then. I mean, I recognize it now because this is what I teach in middle age, but even as a teenager, I recognize that it helped me to react better to all of the crap that the world dishes out, especially to young men, these kind of forced stereotypes. You will be a brute force, domineering kind of guy, right? What the kind of masculinity that sometimes people refer to as toxic. I was able to endure and to release and let go of people's expectations and criticism, because what I found was that the meditation practice was enabling me to stay cool. It was enabling me to stay chill and not react to all of this crap, because I was opening up a gap between stimulus and response, which is why people do it in general. But I didn't really get that connection at the time, yet I still, looking back, found it really happening. It helped me deal with high school. It helped me get through high school. And I had despite the financial circumstance not being an issue, my mother was a hardcore alcoholic. So I had every possibility of going down the road of addiction. If she passed out, often very early in the evening or during the afternoon. So I could have taken her vast stash of booze at any time. And I could have gone down a really, really wrong path. But it was this kind of meditation was sort of an anchor. Nature was an anchor, spirituality, my own sense of, well, I mean, it looked like introversion. Well, I'm not really an introvert. It looked like it to other people at the time because I was constantly going within, but I was doing it to save myself.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Yeah, meditation is definitely a huge key to center ourselves and be able to be coherent and
Mm-hmm.
to be able to show up consciously,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, so that's fundamental. And so, how do you feel like you have some of that? There's the stereotype, and you ought to be tougher, you ought to be like this. But there is a natural masculine energy we have where we're like, we want to mix it up, get in there, get a little tough, get a little aggressive or a little assertive or whatever you want to call it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This ought to be like this, and let's bring something into fruition. And what's your dance or your experience with that energy, like the way it used to be versus the way it may be now? Like, I'd love to hear anything you have to share about that.
When I was younger, I didn't really have a clue what that actually meant. I mean, I think I was utterly clueless, to be honest, about what that actually meant and how I would put that into practice, because I've always had the resolve, a masculine resolve.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't, I've always had that fierceness, even though I appear really calm to a lot of people a lot of the time. It doesn't mean that you can't be fierce. You can be both fierce and intuitive, and you can have hardcore resolve and still be spiritual and loving and emotionally intelligent. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think what I was doing is finding ways to pair the two, and the emotional intelligence and the resolve, the emotional intelligence and the clarity, right? The loving, tender, forgiving nature, the relaxation with resolve, because I've got that. And I've got now in middle age, crystal clarity about things. So, masculine traits, decisiveness, all of that. And it's evolving, which is the really cool thing, is it's evolving, and I'm noticing new ways now that it's playing out. But it was a matter of time for me to get the tools, and I didn't have them when I was younger. I mean, I had the meditation and I had my desire to explore spirituality, but I didn't have everything all together, and I hadn't experienced enough trauma, as it turns out, like the trauma of a divorce and the trauma of a law school and the trauma of a career that went pretty much hand in hand with the legal profession that wasn't practicing law but still drove me nuts. I mean, it really did. Stressful, right? It took me years to realize, okay, this is totally self-imposed. I impose this, I can unimpose it and end it. And I finally did that. But it took me a long time.
Wow. Well, outstanding. Well, I mean, the last question is just, did you have a phase though where you felt like, was it always semi stable, or did you ever have a phase of like, fine, you want to see brute force, here it comes, or something like that? Or has it always been a little more subdued, like more on the subdued side? Like, yeah.
It's mostly on the subdued side, but yeah, not always. Not always. I have had, and I had it a lot when I was younger, a lot more of a mean attitude because I didn't have a place to put the resolve. So I came out as quite a bit more belligerent. Yeah. I think with a lot of young men, and we still see this all the time in our society, they don't have a place to put it. So what are you going to do with all this? How to channel that energy? Because that's the one word that I associate with the word masculinity. And yes, people can, as you mentioned at the outset, disagree about terms as much as you want. I associate the idea of masculinity with a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? So how does one, where do you put that? How does one channel that or direct that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the question.
That's the question. That's the big one, right? So, but it sounds like, with the time we have left, just to kind of wrap up right now, it's just like you found a way ultimately to kind of reconcile that in your own way. I think like some of us have subdued it so much that we don't realize how much more there is under the hood sometimes, is what I'm getting at. There may be even more under there. Could that be possibly your case too? As there's a little bit of like, there might be even more under there somewhere, but it's a constant exploration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's a constant exploration, and it takes curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the entire spiritual path, whether you're a man or a woman, it takes curiosity and a willingness. It's about a willingness to constantly be looking, because things don't stand still. They might appear to be still, but they're not.
Right. But there's only the infinite stillness. That's the only real thing. Well, there's other things seemingly going on too, though. So we got to pay attention to all of it, right? So anyway, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Thomas, for this conversation. This is so awesome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to discuss this. You bet.
Thank you for listening in to Just Two Conscious Guys Talking, where our mission is to impact millions of men ultimately to deepen their awakening by examining their consciousness of what's been unfolding for them with male stereotypes and programming that has allowed them to have opportunities to evolve during these times. It's an exciting time to bring more love to men and women around the world, and we are grateful for you tuning in today. Feel free to share this episode and keep tuning in, and also look in the show notes for a link to get notifications of future episodes. Until the next time, everyone, goodbye for now.